When Michael Jordan found his high school janitor still mopping floors at 80, he didn't just offer a handshake and move on. What he did next shocked everyone and reminds us why recognizing the unsung heroes in our lives matters more than we realize. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Emsley A. Laney High School in Wilmington, North Carolina. The hallways had emptied hours ago, the final bell just a distant memory as the day wound down. But for one man, the work continued as it had for nearly 5 decades. Daniel Wilson, now 80 years old, moved methodically across the gymnasium floor, his mop creating perfect arcs on the polished surface, each stroke as careful and deliberate as when he first started this job in 1977. He didn't notice the tall figure standing in the doorway, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "Mr. Wilson? Is that really you?" Daniel looked up, squinting slightly as his eyes weren't what they used to be. Standing before him was a man in his early 60s, dressed casually in a golf shirt and baseball cap. But there was something unmistakable about him, a presence that commanded attention without even trying. "Do I know you, son?" Daniel asked, leaning his mop against the wall. The man stepped forward, removing his cap to reveal a familiar face that had graced countless magazine covers, billboards, and television screens around the world. "It's Michael Jordan." Daniel's weathered face broke into a wide smile. "Little Mike Jordan? Is that really you?" Michael laughed, the sound echoing through the empty gym. "Not so little anymore, Mr. Wilson." "Well, I'll be," Daniel said, extending his hand. But instead of shaking it, Michael pulled the old man into a hug. Daniel felt fragile in his arms, like a bird, his once strong frame now diminished by time. "I can't believe you're still working here," Michael said, stepping back to look at the janitor who had once been a fixture of his high school days. "It's been what, over 40 years? 47 years next month," Daniel confirmed with a hint of pride. "Got nowhere else to be, and the school still needs cleaning." Michael shook his head in wonder. This was the same man who had unlocked the gym for him every morning at 5:30 so he could practice before school, who had stayed late without complaint when Michael wanted just 5 more minutes of shooting time, who had offered quiet words of encouragement on days when nothing seemed to go right. "How old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?" "Just turned 80 last week," Daniel said, straightening his back slightly. "And you're still working full-time?" Michael couldn't hide his shock. Daniel shrugged, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Retirement's for folks who can afford it, I suppose." That simple statement hit Michael harder than any defensive player ever had on the court. Here was a man who had shaped his future through small acts of kindness, still mopping floors at an age when most people were long retired. "Do you remember how you used to let me in early to practice?" Michael asked. Daniel's face lit up. "Sure do. You were always first one in, last one out. Never seen nobody work so hard. You remember that day I got cut from varsity? Found you sitting alone in the gym after everyone left?" Daniel nodded, the memory coming back to him. Michael's voice softened. "You know what you said to me that day?" Daniel tilted his head, trying to recall. "Can't say I do exactly." "You said, 'Sometimes the best players are the ones who have to fight for their spot.' Then you handed me the keys to the gym and told me I could practice as long as I wanted, as long as I locked up when I was done." Daniel's eyes crinkled with his smile. "Well, look at that. Gave advice to the greatest basketball player of all time." "That meant a lot to me," Michael said earnestly. "You trusted me with those keys. Made me feel like I was worth something even after getting cut." "You were always worth something," Daniel replied simply. "That's true for every kid, whether they become famous or not." Michael suggested they catch up over dinner, and to his surprise, Daniel accepted, though he insisted on nothing fancy. As they drove to Katie's Diner, a local establishment that had been around since the 1960s, Daniel pointed out changes in the city new buildings where fields used to be, old shops that had closed down. The movie theater where he used to take his wife on date nights now turned into a clothing store. Over cheeseburgers and chocolate milkshakes, Michael learned more about Daniel's life. He was married to Martha, his wife of nearly 58 years. They had 2 children living out west, for grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren he hadn't met yet. Martha still brought him lunch once a week, a ham sandwich with the crusts cut off, treating him like he was still 40. But as the conversation deepened, Michael learned about the challenges Daniel faced. His school pension wasn't enough to live on, especially with Martha's medical bills. She had suffered a stroke 3 years ago and lost the use of her legs. They had to convert their dining room into a bedroom because she couldn't manage the stairs anymore. "Is there help available?" Michael asked. "Government programs or something?" Daniel and Martha exchanged glances. "We get by," he said firmly. "We don't take handouts." Michael recognized the pride in the old man's voice, the same pride that had kept him working all these years instead of asking for help. When Michael drove Daniel home that evening, what he saw shook him to his core. The modest single-story house had peeling paint, a sagging roof, and a wooden ramp hastily built over the front steps that was already showing signs of rot. Inside, the situation was even more heartbreaking. Martha Wilson greeted them from her wheelchair, her silver hair neatly styled despite her frail appearance. Her eyes lit up at the sight of Michael, but it was the love that passed between her and Daniel that truly moved him after nearly 6 decades together. They still looked at each other like newlyweds. As Michael was given a tour of their home, he noticed everything: the narrow hallway where Martha couldn't maneuver her wheelchair without help, the bathroom she couldn't access, the kitchen cabinets she couldn't reach. In their makeshift bedroom, he saw a hospital bed for Martha and a twin mattress on the floor for Daniel. "James couldn't fit in the hospital bed with me," Martha explained when she caught Michael looking. "And our old bed was too high for me to get into safely. It's just temporary," Daniel added quickly, "until we figure something else out." Michael swallowed hard. This proud man who had helped shape his future was sleeping on the floor at 80 years old. That night, in his hotel room, Michael couldn't sleep. The image of Daniel and Martha's situation haunted him. He thought about all the people who had contributed to his success: coaches, teachers, trainers, but also the invisible support system, the people whose names weren't on championship trophies but who made those championships possible. People like Daniel Wilson. By dawn, Michael had made a decision. This wasn't just about helping one elderly couple. It was about acknowledging all the Mr. Wilsons of the world, the unsung heroes who change lives through small kindnesses and unwavering belief in others. The next morning, Michael began making calls to contractors, healthcare specialists, financial advisors, and old friends from his North Carolina days. By evening, he had assembled a remarkable team and outlined an ambitious plan: completely renovate the Wilson home in just 10 days, making it fully accessible for Martha's wheelchair and comfortable for them both. "Money is no object," he told Dave Thompson, a local contractor. "I want the best crew you can find." Dave whistled low. "You're really going to do this for the old janitor?" "He's not just an old janitor," Michael replied firmly. "He's the man who believed in me when no one else did." The plan grew more elaborate by the hour. Michael arranged for the school principal to give Daniel a week off with pay under the pretense of a special maintenance project. He booked the Wilsons into a beachfront cottage for what he called a basketball camp reunion, ensuring it was fully accessible for Martha's wheelchair. As word spread about the project, something extraordinary happened. People began showing up at the Wilson home, offering to help. A local flooring company donated hardwood for the living room. A furniture store offered to replace their worn-out sofa. High school students volunteered to help with painting. An elderly neighbor approached Michael as he inspected the property. "I've lived across the street from James and Martha for 30 years, she said. "Never seen anything like this. It's like one of those TV shows where they rebuild someone's house." "He deserves it," Michael replied simply. "He does," she agreed. "James Wilson is the finest man in this neighborhood, always the first to help when someone needs it." Throughout the day, more stories emerged. The time Daniel had paid for a student's cap and gown when her family couldn't afford it. How he had fixed a young mother's car when her baby was sick. How he had mowed an elderly widow's lawn for 2 straight months after her husband passed away. Michael realized that Daniel hadn't just impacted his life. He had touched countless others through decades of quiet generosity. This renovation wasn't just about repaying a personal debt. It was about honoring a lifetime of service that had gone largely unrecognized. As the physical renovation progressed, walls coming down to create wider doorways, the bathroom being converted to a roll-in shower, the kitchen redesigned with accessible features, Michael was also working on another transformation behind the scenes. With his financial team, he established a trust fund that would provide monthly income for the Wilsons, enough that Daniel could finally retire. He arranged for Martha's medical expenses to be covered and set up regular healthcare services to visit their home. But the most meaningful part of the plan came to Michael one night as he sat on the front steps of the Wilson home, watching the stars appear in the clear Carolina sky. Daniel Wilson had spent his life opening doors for others, literally and figuratively. Now it was time for someone to open a door for him. The next day, Michael called his lawyer and set up the paperwork for the James Wilson Foundation, an organization dedicated to recognizing and supporting school support staff. Janitors, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, maintenance people who make a difference in students' lives but often go unnoticed. The foundation would provide scholarships, emergency financial assistance, and recognition programs. And who better to serve as its first executive director than Daniel Wilson himself? 7 days after they left for their vacation, the Wilsons returned home, completely unaware of what awaited them. A small crowd had gathered: neighbors, former students, teachers from Laney High, and everyone who had worked on the renovation. As their car pulled up, Michael stepped forward. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson." Daniel looked around bewildered. "Michael, what is this? Why are all these people here?" "While you were enjoying your vacation," Michael explained gently, "we've been working on a little surprise for you." He guided them to the front door where a large red ribbon had been stretched across. "Mr. Wilson, would you do the honors?" With shaking hands, Daniel cut the ribbon. As the door swung open, revealing the transformed interior, Martha gasped, her hands covering her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This can't be real," he kept saying. "This can't be real." The tour that followed was filled with tears and amazement. Every room had been thoughtfully redesigned, the wider doorways that allowed Martha's wheelchair to pass easily, the roll-in shower she could use independently, the kitchen with lowered countertops she could reach, the adjustable bed large enough for both of them to sleep comfortably together. In the backyard, raised garden beds had been built so Martha could tend to flowers from her wheelchair. A covered patio provided a peaceful spot for morning coffee. Every detail had been considered, from lever-handled faucets for arthritic hands to a smart home system that would allow them to control lights and temperature with voice commands. "But why?" Daniel finally asked, his voice breaking. "Why would you do all this?" Michael placed a hand on the older man's shoulder. "Because you changed my life, Mr. Wilson. That day when I got cut from varsity, I was ready to quit. But you believed in me when no one else did." "I just unlocked a door," Daniel said softly. "Sometimes that's all someone needs," Michael replied. "An open door and a chance." Then came the final surprise. Michael led them to a small room at the back of the house that had once been used for storage. Now it had been transformed into a beautiful home office with a desk facing the window overlooking the backyard. "This is for you, Mr. Wilson," Michael said, pointing to a framed document on the wall. "That's the incorporation paperwork for the James Wilson Foundation. Its mission is to recognize and support school support staff, the people who make our schools run but often go unnoticed." Daniel stepped closer to read the document, his eyes widening. "Named after me? You're the inspiration," Michael explained. "And if you want it, there's a position waiting for you as the Foundation's first executive director. You'd help identify deserving recipients and share your wisdom about what these workers really need." "Why me?" Daniel asked. "There must be more qualified people." "There's no one more qualified to represent the heart of this foundation than you," Michael said firmly. "It doesn't need another businessman or fundraiser. It needs someone who understands the value of showing up every day, doing your job with pride, and caring about the people around you." After a long moment, Daniel nodded. "Then yes, I accept." That evening, as the celebration continued and the Wilsons were surrounded by love and gratitude from their community, Daniel pulled Michael aside. "You know, he said quietly. "When I was a young man just starting at Laney, my father gave me some advice. He said, 'James, you might just be mopping floors, but do it like you're changing the world, because you never know whose life you might affect.'" He looked around at his transformed home, at his beaming wife, at the office where he would start a new chapter of his life's work. "I guess he was right." Michael smiled. He was right, and now everyone knows it. The story of Michael Jordan and Daniel Wilson didn't end that day. In the months that followed, the James Wilson Foundation grew beyond anyone's expectations. Schools across the country began recognizing their support staff in new ways. Other athletes and celebrities were inspired to start similar programs in their communities. Daniel, now retired from mopping floors but busier than ever, traveled to schools nationwide, sharing his story and reminding students and staff alike of the power of small kindnesses. Martha, with the help of physical therapy equipment now installed in their home, regained some mobility and found joy in gardening again from her wheelchair. And Michael? He discovered that of all his achievements, the 6 NBA championships, the global brand, the billions in wealth, none gave him the same satisfaction as seeing the man who had once unlocked a gym door for him now opening doors for countless others. I've thought a lot about this story and what it means for all of us. We live in a world that celebrates the spectacular, the game-winning shots, the record-breaking achievements, the viral moments of greatness. But beneath every success story lies an invisible foundation of support. People who believed in us, encouraged us, or simply showed up consistently when we needed them most. Think about your own life for a moment. Who was your Mr. Wilson? The teacher who stayed after school to help you understand a difficult concept? The neighbor who checked in on you when times were tough? The coach who saw potential in you that you couldn't see yourself? Now ask yourself, have you ever properly thanked them? Have you told them what their support meant to you? Or are they still metaphorically mopping floors, unaware of the impact they've had? What strikes me most about Michael Jordan's gesture isn't the money spent or even the physical transformation of the Wilson home, impressive as those things are. It's the recognition, the acknowledgement that this man's life of service mattered, that the small kindnesses he extended day after day for decades were seen, remembered, and valued. In my own life, I've come to realize that recognition is perhaps the most powerful gift we can give another person. Not just praise for achievements, but genuine acknowledgement of who they are and how they've impacted others. It costs nothing to tell someone, "You made a difference to me." Yet the absence of such recognition can leave even the most dedicated souls wondering if their efforts matter at all. This story challenges me, and I hope it challenges you, to look around and recognize the unsung heroes in our own lives. The maintenance workers who keep our buildings functioning. The administrative assistants who make our offices run smoothly. The bus drivers who safely transport our children each day. The healthcare aides who tend to our elderly with dignity and compassion. These people form the backbone of our society, yet they often work in the shadows, their contributions overlooked or taken for granted. What would happen if we started seeing them, really seeing them, and acknowledging their worth? You don't need Michael Jordan's resources to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is a sincere thank you, a handwritten note, or simply taking the time to learn someone's name and story. These small acts of recognition can be transformative, both for the recipient and for ourselves. So here's my challenge to you. This week, identify one person in your life who has made a difference but may not know it. It could be someone from your past or present, a teacher, a mentor, a service worker, or even a family member whose consistent support you've come to take for granted. Reach out to them. Tell them specifically how they impacted you. Don't just say thank you. Tell them what you're thanking them for and how it changed your path. You might be surprised by how powerful this simple act of recognition can be. Because the truth is, we all need to be seen. We all need to know that our efforts matter. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give another person is to hold up a mirror that reflects not just who they are, but the positive difference they've made in the world. Daniel Wilson spent decades unlocking doors for others without expecting anything in return. Michael Jordan's gesture wasn't just about a home renovation. It was about ensuring that Daniel's lifetime of service was finally recognized and celebrated. What doors have been unlocked for you? And more importantly, whose door can you unlock today through the simple power of recognition? Sometimes the most profound impact comes from those we least expect, and sometimes the greatest gift we can give is acknowledgement of a life quietly lived in service to others. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Take action. Recognize someone today. Share this message with others who might need this reminder. Together, we can create a culture where no one's contributions go unnoticed, where everyone feels valued, and where acts of kindness, both given and received, are acknowledged with the gratitude they deserve. Because in the end, it's not just about building better homes. It's about building a better world, one recognition at a time.